Okay, this is a video recording of lesson 15 titled Work Management. Should be a pretty short video here today because most of this lesson takes the form of an in-class group activity, but nonetheless we still have a few slides that we can go over and record and present here and upload to YouTube. Okay, so with that, if we revisit our development operations diagram here, this lesson, or lesson 15, falls right here in the plan phase of the DevOps lifecycle. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about planning work, or planning the addition of software features within the development lifecycle, and then those features or this work will be done in subsequent phases, coding a new feature, for example, testing a new feature, releasing a new feature, and so on. So this is kind of the inception of new work coming into the lifecycle, the plan phase here. Okay, so in our development roles diagram, for the 5 development roles we picked out for this course, we're talking about the last one here today, the product owner. So the product owner is the person on the software development team that will be responsible for describing the work to be done on a software product or the features to be added to a software product, and making sure that work is described in a way that is easily understandable and that is actionable, and there's various conventions that the product owner can use to describe work. And we'll talk about one of those conventions here today. The product owner is also responsible for prioritizing the order in which work should be done, which features are more important than others, which work should be done at all, and which work should not be done because it doesn't match the vision of the software product. So these are some things the product owner thinks about, and we'll get into more details here. So in terms of tools, if we're going back to our tools diagram, the new tool here is Azure Boards. So it's a subsection of Azure DevOps that the product owner is going to spend a lot of time in when doing their job. And here is a picture of a board. So each of these items here, these are called user stories, each of these little items on the diagram. We'll talk about user stories and writing work using that convention. And there's also these swim lanes here that describe where each item of work is located in the development lifecycle. Okay, and then I threw some communication tools on here just to kind of represent that the product owner does a lot of communicating with others. Okay, so let's think about this next diagram here. And let's, for example, take a mainstream software product like YouTube.com, for example. And if we think about this product, there are a lot of different people that have a vested interest in what this product does, what this product is, how this project is built, and so on. And so all these people that have a vested interest in a product are generically called stakeholders. Okay, so here are some different stakeholders for YouTube.com, for example. Of course, the users are important, right? If people aren't using the software, then you don't have much of a product in the first place. But also the developers and the testers and the rest of the development team who work very hard to make this product possible. They all have vested interests and opinions and influence on a software product. And then, of course, the company that builds the product, Google, for example, and executives there and clients, right? They also have a vested interest in this product. And then you have outside forces such as government regulators and advertisers who also have influence on this product, right? So advertisers don't want graphic content on YouTube, for example, because they don't want their advertisements to be shown and associated with such content. Or government regulators have a vested interest in YouTube because they don't want fake news, for example, to be distributed through the platform, right? So different people have different influences. And the idea of the product owner is they're responsible for balancing all these influences as best they can in deciding what the vision of a software product should be, and ultimately deciding what work or what features get added to a product. So it's not always as clean as this diagram. Of course, a government, for example, has a lot of power, and even if the product owner thinks something's a bad idea, that might not matter, for example. So, but that's the idea, and on a lot of software products, this is what we strive for: is the product owner collectively representing all these different viewpoints, and boiling them down into actionable features that get added to a software product. Okay, another slide on the product owner role with a bit more text here. So our one sentence definition is the product owner will be a singular voice that can communicate between all stakeholders, define requirements, and prioritize work. And the product owner in their job function will need to, of course, represent all the different views of the different stakeholders and balance concerns between different types of stakeholders. So a big communication job here with the product owner. But then also the second bullet point is just as important, and that is the product owner needs to formulate concrete requirements for the product that the development team can actually act on. So a lot of times stakeholders will have ideas that are not fully formulated and are not necessarily actionable, and the software development team can't act on ideas that are not completely hashed out. So a big job of the product owner is figuring out what the users actually want, what the stakeholders actually want, how it fits in the vision, and then hashing out the exact software requirement for the work item. Okay. And then, again, back to communication, being able to communicate with technical staff as well. So, you have advertisers, you have government officials, you have developers, you have testers, you have users, right? So there's all these different types of people, and the product owner needs to be able to handle those different worldviews of those different people. Okay, the convention we would use in this course for describing our software requirements are user stories. And a user story is structurally composed of the following. So a story name, short, easily identifiable name for the story. Okay. A description, which is a short note about what a type of user wants and why they want it. And so for our course, we will use the following convention for writing descriptions. So we'll say, as a type of user, blah, 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 I want this so that this. So the type of user, so we'll talk more about different types of users, what they want, and why they want it. Okay? Shorten to the point writing here. Acceptance criteria, which is what the user of the software thinks it will look like when this user story has been completed. Okay, so how from the user's perspective, has the software changed when you've completed the user story? Okay, so that's the idea of acceptance criteria. We'll see some examples here. You can put attachments, other supplemental information, and so on user stories. And then these last two items are priority. So how important is this user story to complete versus other user stories. That's all priority is. And then story points, which is the amount of effort the user story is expected to take to complete. And we're going to talk about more about story points here. Okay, so story points are the unit we use to estimate how much effort it will take for a software development team to complete an item of work or to complete a user story. And the interesting part about story points is they are typically measured in an abstract unit as opposed to a concrete unit. So a concrete unit would be estimating work in terms of hours. So the software development team might say, this user story will take 65 hours to complete, for example. And the issue with using hours is that hour estimates tend to be inaccurate. It's notoriously difficult to give an accurate hour number for how long something will take to complete. Okay, so for that reason, teams have found it more helpful to use an abstract unit to disconnect the amount of effort they feel it'll take versus an exact hour number. Okay, so some examples of abstract units are t-shirt sizes, dog breeds, and Fibonacci numbers. And so t-shirt sizes, for example, saying this is a small amount of work. This user story is a small amount of work. Or this user story is a double XL amount of work. That's an abstract unit. Dog breeds is another example. So this will take a Saint Bernard worth of work, or a Rottweiler worth of work, or a Chihuahua worth of work. Okay. So those are units that teams might actually be using to estimate effort. But a common one here is Fibonacci numbers. So the nice part about Fibonacci's numbers is that they are still numerical, which has some benefit, but they're not an actual unit, right? You're saying something will take a 5 amount of work, or an 8 amount of work, or a 13 amount of work. And so these numbers are kind of different enough that you're no longer like sticking to the mindset of hours. So and they grow exponentially. So if something takes a 21 amount of work, we're not saying it takes 20 more hours than something that takes a 1 amount of work. We're just saying this is significantly bigger than a 1 amount of work. Okay. So that's the idea there. Okay, this next slide is getting at the life cycle that a user story might go through. So when a user story is first written by the product owner, it is placed in the backlog. And the backlog is just going to contain all the software requirements or all the user stories that the product owner has identified and written, and so on. And from the backlog, the product owner will prioritize these user stories so that the most important user stories, the user stories with highest value, are on top. And from there, the product owner can start presenting these user stories to the rest of the development team. And the rest of the development team will collectively agree on an amount of story points, or the amount of effort that the user story will take. And if the team decides to act on this user story, then the user story will be placed in the active state. Okay, and then the development happens. The development of the code that completes the user story, the testing of the new feature, and then the deployment of the feature to the end product will happen. And after all that's happened, the user story will be in the resolve state, and then finally the product owner will review the product and confirm with the stakeholders that everyone is happy with the completion of this user story. And if that's the case, then the user story will enter the closed state. So that's kind of one way to think about the life cycle of a user story. So created, placed in the backlog, prioritized in the backlog, assigned story points, and then it's worked. The story is worked by the team, the development team, and then it's confirmed and closed by the project owner. Okay. Okay, so this last slide gets at working and completing these user stories in an agile development setting. So in agile development, teams try to work and complete and deploy user stories within a fixed time schedule. So they might try to release a new version of the software every 3 weeks or every 5 weeks or every 2 months. Whatever it is, they have a fixed time schedule, and by the end of that time frame, they want to release a new version of the software that has completed a certain set of user stories. Okay, so that's the idea there. And one question you might want to ask is, how much work can we complete in the time frame we have? And again, we're measuring in abstract units, so that can get kind of interesting, because then you're going to be saying things like, well, we can complete a Great Dane and 2 golden retrievers and 7 beagles worth of work in the time frame, right? You have these weird units, or we can do 2 Great Danes and a beagle, but no more. So you have this weird kind of unit of measurement here. But again, the idea is you have a kind of an intuitive sense of what you can do in your time frame. And you can map work as it gets complete in a burn chart. So these are somewhat common. So this is actually a pretty long development iteration. This is it looks like a 3-month iteration, and the team can complete a certain amount of work in this iteration, and ideally, it would all be worked continuously, and the team would finish on time by doing X amount of work each day. But in reality, it's messy. Sometimes work goes a little slower, sometimes it goes faster, and so on. And so this is just kind of a tool to intuitively see, are you on track to complete your user stories of various complexity and effort. Okay. Okay, last thing here is just a few examples of some user stories that I have written in our course's public Azure DevOps project. So here's the backlog. This is where the product owner will start writing user stories and arranging them in a priority order here. So this is all configurable, and you can move it around. So that's the backlog, and then here is the board where you might track the completion of these user stories. So this lane is the stories that are active, and this lane is resolved and closed, and so on. So these are called swim lanes here, and if we look into the content of a user story, let's see all the things we talked about in here. So here's the name of the user story, centralized office hours. And the description is, as we had on the slide, is as a certain type of user. So as a student, I want to be able to see a calendar view of when office hours for all my instructors are for the courses I am currently enrolled in, so that I can plan my week if I want to stop by their office hours. Okay? So that's the description. It's who I am. So I'm a student, and what I want a calendar view of my instructor's office hours, and why I want it is so that I can plan my week if I want to stop by their office hours. Okay, and then the acceptance criteria, you can see it gets a little more specific about what the user's expecting when the story is completed. So the acceptance criteria here is, in my Outlook web app, I should be able to see a calendar overlay that shows me the time frames for the office hours of all my instructors in the classes I am enrolled in. Okay? So that's the acceptance criteria, and of course there's room for attachments and any other supplemental information that would be helpful for this user story. You can attach it all on here. In addition, there's also the ability to assign user stories to certain developers, for example, or to certain testers, for example. And then here's the story points. So by default, the story points in Azure DevOps need to be numerical, but we also saw that it's not uncommon to use non-numerical values such as dog breeds. So I've added a new field here. So this one here has to be numerical, right? Otherwise it yells at you. But I added a new field that's allowed to have text in it, and I'm gauging this work as taking 21 story points or one Bernese Mountain Dog worth of work. Okay, and my reasoning for that might be, this is it's hard to get at this information of when your instructor's office hours are. The only place, it might be the case that the only place it's located is within the syllabus on icon. So completing this work is going to involve being able to download the syllabus, find and identify and download the syllabus from icon, be able to extract those office hours out of the syllabus, and then from there, being able to interpret the values and present them on a calendar view. So to me, it seemed like quite a bit of work to complete this user story. So that's why I geared it as a Bernese Mountain Dog and 21 story points. And then I also have a priority value here. So I consider 1 the highest priority and 4 the lowest. And I put this as a 3. It's not all that urgent since I have all the information anyway. Actually, I'm going to put it as a 4, right? Because I can find all this information myself as a student. This feature is really more of a convenience thing. Okay, so that's an example of a user story. We got a few more here. So here's a user story called customer complaint reporting, and think about a company that maybe your internet company, for example. They might be getting complaints from customers. And the description of the story is, as an executive at this company, I want to be able to run a report that tells me what issues are causing the most customer complaints so that I can investigate the involved company procedures and change them as necessary to reduce complaints. Right? So who's asking? An executive is asking. They want to be able to see this executive report on what is causing people to file complaints with their company, and they describe why they want that and so on, and then acceptance criteria, describing what it might look like when the story is completed. This executive now has some button they can click on some website that generates this report for them, for example. I geared this as a 5 amount of work and a Labrador amount of work here, and priority 2, right? This is it's the priority is relative to other work you have going on. So, it's kind of a relative value here. All right, so there's that one. Let's look at, here going back to our sorting hat thing. Here's a story called the Weasley Rule, and it says, and this one's actually kind of interesting because it says, as a student with the last name Weasley, I want to be assigned to Gryffindor so that Hogwarts can remain in legal compliance. So I think I wrote this in an interesting way here, where the person who actually wants this requirement this feature is Hogwarts, right? Because they have a legal obligation, as according to what I wrote on the homework 1 assignment, they have a legal obligation to assign anyone with the last name Weasley to Gryffindor. Okay, but from the perspective of the user, the user is a student, right? This is a student that approaches the hat and gets sorted. So it's kind of an interesting structure of the writing there. And we'll see another example here in a second. So this was a one amount of work, a beagle amount of work. But here's another example. So gas meter inspection notice. So think about a gas company that has natural gas lines going into everyone's houses, right? There's equipment involved in that, and the equipment is subject to routine inspections, and that's required by the government. Okay, government regulation. So the idea here is, if we read the description, as a gas service worker, I want to be notified with 2 weeks notice about a gas meter needing routine inspection so that the company remains in regulatory compliance. Right. So the reason we want this is because of the regulatory compliance, but the user that interfaces with this is not that. It's not the government. It's not regulatory agencies. It's the person that will actually be benefiting from this, who would actually interact with this user story. And in that case, it's the gas service worker. So interesting structure here, but it's helpful for the development team to know which user expects what when writing this. And so that's why I structured it in that way. And I said this one was 8 points or a German short-haired pointer worth of work. And really the priority should probably be 1, right? Because this is going to help us as a company stay in regulatory compliance. Okay, so there's some examples of some user stories here.